and welcome to the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture's virtual forum, Cultivating Knowledge, Exploring the Future of Agriculture and Education. My name is Bianca Deans and I'm the Education and Work Integrated Learning Officer at the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture, and I'm delighted to be your host for today's event. Firstly, as a reflection of this institution's recognition of the deep history and culture of this island, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Palawa people, and custodians upon the land which we meet, and pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. Each year, TR interacts with hundreds of people through workshops, presentations, and field trips across Tasmania. We know that not everyone is able to join us on farm, so we're offering front row seats in virtual forums, connecting you with experts as we explore issues relating to the future of agriculture with a direct focus on Tasmania. I'd like to recognise that today is National Agriculture Day. This day aims to raise awareness about the importance of farmers and workers who put food on our tables, and it's a fitting backdrop for today's discussions. Just a few housekeeping notes before today's forum gets underway. Your microphone, camera, chat, and raised hand functions have all been disabled so our speakers are not interrupted during the session. However, we do encourage you to ask questions, and this can be done at any time by typing into the Q&A function that you can see on your screens. You can ask questions anonymously, and a selection will be answered during the Q&A session towards the end of the discussion. And finally, this forum is being recorded and also live streamed on our YouTube channel. Today, we're exploring the vital role of education and training in empowering Tasmania's agricultural sectors to address future challenges. While it's no secret that Australia boasts 6 job opportunities for every agricultural science graduate, the industry continues to grapple with workforce recruitment. A skilled workforce is crucial to meet the Tasmanian Government's target of sustainably increasing the annual farm gate value of agriculture to $10 billion by 2050. Today's presenters will share concise presentations, paving the way for an engaging panel discussion where you, the audience, can submit questions. We're going to leap now into our panel. To start off with, we've got Professor Alastair Gracie, who is the Head of Learning and Teaching at the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture. He oversees the delivery of the Bachelor of Agricultural Science at the University of Tasmania. Welcome, Alastair.
Thank you, Bianca, and thank you for those joining online as well. Yeah, I think this is an absolutely fantastic initiative to have a day that actually recognises agriculture. And fundamentally, obviously, when we are doing that, we're actually acknowledging the people that work in the sector. We know that the agriculture sector in Australia is broad and diverse, and that it covers everything from mango and banana production in Northern Australia to the broadacre cereal, beef, sheep operations that we are very synonymous with, sort of the classical images of that Akuba wearing Australian farmer in a drought, hot environment. All the way down south to where we've got these intensive, cool, temperate, dairy, vegetable and fruits that we are very familiar with here in Tasmania. And while agriculture is about food and fibre production, it's also inclusive of the production of a range of products that we may use for medicinal or industrial purposes, and pyrethrum and poppies readily come to mind when we think of that. Or we may use things for enjoyment, such as flowers or wines from viticulture. And while agriculture is classically seen as an outdoor venture, we're increasingly seeing the uptake of really high-tech controlled environments for producing crops. And these are obviously coming into play to mitigate against the risks of extreme weather events and ensure year-round supply of produce. Collectively, it's reported that the farm gate value of the sector is about $90 billion per annum. Now, that amount is shared among the growers of Australia, but in no way does it go close to capturing the overall value and the importance of the sector to the Australian communities. Think about value adding, think about its importance in health and well-being, think about food security, think about its deep connection to other sectors such as hospitality, transport and processing. But what is clear is that the success and the ongoing success of this important and dynamic sector is underpinned by its people. And while we may think about production, we know that there's a whole range of career opportunities out there that are about managing the world's resources through to supplying people with produce that they are seeking. And so fundamentally, all the way along this supply chain are career opportunities that are interesting and rewarding. Let's think about a few. Let's think about managing the natural resources. We need people like soil scientists who understand the physical, chemical, and biological properties of that substrate that we grow our plants in. We need people who can advise on the growing of crops. We need people involved in biosecurity to protect our sector from the invasive species of weeds, pests, and other diseases. We need biodiversity experts like entomologists who understand which insects are beneficial and which are detrimental. We need people who help out with business acumen. So we need people in agribusiness to make informed financial decisions. We need people with plant breeding skills. We need people with animal skills in animal nutrition, husbandry, and welfare. We need people increasingly with ag tech skills. We've seen the uptake of of technology in a range of other sectors, and it's inevitable that the agricultural sector will see the increased uptake of technology to inform decision making, but also to assist with increased efficiencies of production. We need people who are experts in food science and food technology. We need people who are experts in food safety to ensure that what we consume is not only nutritious, but safe. And as Bianca mentioned in her introduction, there's something like 6 jobs available for every graduate for the Bachelor of Agricultural Science. That value comes from data that's collected by the Australian Councils of Deans for Agriculture, where they've recorded the number of jobs advertised each year, and then compared that with the number of graduates who are coming out of our programs across Australian universities with a Bachelor of Agricultural Science, and hence they've come up with that figure. And so I just briefly want to acknowledge the people that currently work in the sector, but also acknowledge the potential careers for future interest to others as well. The reality is that our sector does depend on its people, and there are many wonderful career opportunities that are available for this sector. So thank you, Bianca. I think I've used my 5 minutes.
Thank you, Alistair. That was very insightful. So many pathways and opportunities in agriculture. Thank you for highlighting those. We're going to move now on to Nathan Cox, who is an agricultural teacher at TasTAFE and is responsible for teaching students at the new Agricultural Centre of Excellence in Burnie. Nathan says the most rewarding aspect of his role is the opportunity to help the next generation of Tasmanian farmers develop and progress to be successful. This plays a huge role in ensuring farming in Tasmania remains sustainable, progressive, and a profitable industry. Welcome, Nathan.
Thank you, Bianca. I was asked to present on the future of agricultural training at TasTAFE, and it gave me some questions as to where to start. So I thought I'd start with our students, and our cohort of students over the last few years has caused us to understand that the importance of agricultural training is paramount. We can't assume anymore that our students come in with an inherent knowledge or grasp of farming fundamentals. The disconnect between the urban environment and our farming industry is greater than ever. And so we bring them in with a need for understanding, a need for practical skills. And that's where TasTAFE steps up to the challenge. The industry expects that TasTAFE will deliver broad agricultural skill and knowledge development. We're up to that challenge, as I said, but particularly as ag tech becomes more available and implemented more on farm, all eyes are on TasTAFE to develop and implement training in those areas and embed it in our programs. We're fortunate that at the moment we have a great group of teachers within TasTAFE in the agricultural space, teachers that are generally still active and credible in industry, and undertake regular and deep professional development to stay up to speed, so that the training that our cohort of students receives is as up to date as it can be. So looking forward, we have the government's investment in the Centre of Excellence, and key to that is an integrated process of embedding technology into the farming operations here at Burnie. And just the start of that, the taster of that we've seen over the last 12 to 18 months is the implementation of precision ag equipment into tractors and implements. We've seen some industry-leading technology, including an automated pneumatic crush and draft system that has auto-dosing for drenching and treating cattle. And we're starting to build an on-farm sensor program, starting with a high-end weather station and everything that goes with that. So the programs that we teach and the training that's done has that technology embedded into it. So as we would train with machinery, that precision ag naturally becomes part of what we teach. We're looking at exposure to industry utilisation of future technologies such as drones and other technologies like that. We're looking at how to utilise and embed more of our training with IT platforms for quality control, NLIS and other things. So future plans for better outcomes for our students, better outcomes for industry, trying to meet the expectations of industry as to what training is required. Because a lot of our farms across the state are now more specialised, many students only get a narrow range of skill exposure, a narrow range of skills that they develop in their day-to-day work. So the expectation on TasTAFE is that as we would train, we would broaden their exposure, broaden their skill base. And that requires more intensive off-farm training and a broadening of what we deliver. One of the future plans for what we're trying to embed in our training up here are animal simulators. So that provides more opportunity for students with little to no skill, experience or exposure to be able to practice intrusive animal-based skills. Some of those skills that we can develop through animal simulation would be things like carving presentations, dealing with abnormal carving presentations and the experience of actually trying to resolve some of those. We can purchase and use injection simulators. So those intrusive practices can be practiced, muscle memory can be developed, and students can see whether or not they're successful and doing things in an ethical way. We can also do ear tagging practice. Now, ear tagging is one of those things that sounds like a simple thing, but if it's done wrong, causes distress and harm to the animal. Simulators allow us to teach basic preg testing and AI. We're also trying to implement and use better irrigation technology, to apply learning platform technology, taking the technology to the student where there's lower network opportunities with Telstra and Optus and others, where the coverage just isn't there. And we're looking at embedding more specific learning opportunities relating to ag tech, and we're working with UTAS and TER on that at the moment. So future challenges, things we need to be very aware of. We need to be aware that we need to promote the intersection of career opportunities and outcomes in vet ag. So the careers that are available, the opportunities are available post Certificate 2, 3, 4 and diploma outcomes. There's a challenge with industry and vet sector with TasTAFE, collaborating and communicating, building these programs together, building the outcomes for our students and for our future agricultural workforce. Big challenge is the speed of technological change. We struggle to keep up just like everyone does, but we're up for the challenge.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you, Bianca.
Nathan, that was very insightful. So much going on with TasTAFE. Congrats on the opening of the new centre. That's fantastic. Moving on to our next speaker, Andrew Harris, who is a State Coordinator of Food and Fibre Production and Revitalising School Farms. Andrew believes that mandatory food and fibre education in every year of schooling should be a high agenda item in Tasmania. Aspirational perhaps, but it's something that Andrew believes is both important and deliverable. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Bianca. I won't go straight into that controversial bit about the mandatory food and fibre education. We might get there towards the end. And welcome everyone that's joined the forum today. What I wanted to talk about, though, was the work that I do in Tasmanian schools with the many colleagues that teach food and fibre and agriculture in schools around the state. And I guess our work really underpins the pathway that builds that interest and gets us to where, fills the courses that Alistair was talking about and fills the training opportunities that Nathan was talking about. So I often get asked, what's happening in schools? Is there any agriculture, or why don't we teach agriculture in schools? Well, I do have some good news to share with people today, and that is that there is a fair bit of food and fibre agricultural education happening in Tasmanian schools. It really kicked off around 10 years ago when there was a broad group of stakeholders brought to a series of roundtable conversations. And out of those conversations was the concept of an initiative called Primary Schools to Primary Industries. Now, that later got handballed, if you like, to the Education Department to put some flesh on the bones of it, and that has happened. And Primary Schools to Primary Industries is the key initiative that I lead for the Education Department in Tassie now. And what is it? Well, it's basically a path. It describes a pathway of learning opportunities for students from early years to year 10, post year 10, year 11, 12, and then through to further education and training. And the way we do that is by developing, and we have developed and continue to develop resources, a broad range of resources that support high quality teaching and learning in schools through that whole continuum that I just mentioned. So there is a suite of resources now that are available to schools. It's not mandatory to engage with them, I should say that, but they're available to all schools in this state. And the key one that I want to talk about briefly is the Tasmanian Agricultural Education Framework. Now, that was launched by our current Premier when he was Minister for Education back in 2016. And the framework really is based on 7 priorities that are described through the years of schooling and provide guidance to schools in their planning and in their teaching and learning to make their programs sustainable. So, that they can be sustainable and reach that high goal of being important in our school setting. I wanted to talk briefly about one of those priorities, and that is the student learning priority. That one is really, the key to that one is about providing a balanced approach to student learning. And what I'm talking about there is balancing things like the academic rigour, the laboratory, the ag science, the know-how. So that classroom-based learning, balancing that with high quality experiential opportunities, the hands-on opportunities. So for a long time, our ag programs in schools were almost exclusively hands-on, experiential. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. That's great that we've got that element. But what we've become very clear about now is that we need to balance that with that academic rigour, that classroom-based laboratory-style learning as well. And we got that notion embedded into our TasAgEd framework so that if schools engage with that framework, they can see some guidance in there so that they can plan and implement those programs. I guess the other part of the framework that's really important, well, there's lots of important, there's 7 important priorities to be honest, but I'm not going to get through them all today. But the curriculum priority, we've spent a lot of time with the help of key stakeholders like PIFA, the Primary Industries Education Foundation of Australia, spent a lot of time uncovering where food and fibre education fits in the Australian curriculum. And that's a key to being able and having permission, if you like, to deliver food and fibre agricultural education in schools. So we've done that. There are plenty of opportunities in the Australian curriculum where you can connect through all the learning areas to deliver food and fibre. I want to touch on, I'm going to skip to priority number 7, which is maybe last on the list, but by certainly not the least important, and that is stakeholder partnerships. Now, in the AgEd framework, we clearly describe how important stakeholder partnerships in delivering food and fibre in schools. And in Tassie, we are incredibly lucky to have wonderful support from peak bodies like the TAPG and the TFGA. They do a power of work in promoting and advocating for high quality AgEd. And then agribusiness and industry in general. They really go the extra mile to support what we're trying to do in schools. So we're in a great place, Bianca, in Tassie for AgEd at the moment. Should it be mandatory? There are some groups looking at that nationally, and who knows where that'll, if it does come, we're in a great place to deliver some high quality stuff in schools.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for also bringing that question into that as well. Nice segue as well into agribusiness. So next up, we have Elizabeth Skirving, who's the CEO of Rural Business Tasmania. She has an extensive board directorship portfolio, including as a member of the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture's Advisory Board. Elizabeth has a deep understanding of the agricultural sector, coming from a fifth-generation farming family. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Bianca, and great to see so many attendees at this forum. For those that don't know Rural Business Tasmania, we're a statewide confidential service providing opportunities to small businesses, including farmers, fishers and forestry, and related small business enterprises through business and financial management skills. So what my bread and butter is about looking at the business of farming, and any small business, any business needs to not only have the practical skills, but also to be able to run a business. And that's something that is key to a successful operation, to make sure that it is viable, that it's profitable, and it has longevity. So looking at some of those skill sets and what we can actually do, there's a few challenges at the moment that we're facing. One of those key ones are the labour shortages that are projected to continue, and I'll speak of those a little bit later. We need different needs for different generations. And so some of those challenges for those working in any sector, but specifically in the ag sector, is really important. And one, and I think it shows up in the questions already, is the perception of working in agriculture. And I know Al talked about that as well. What is an agricultural business, and where are the components of that as to what sort of a career you can have. I'm an accountant by trade. I'm not a farmer, but I see myself as being in the ag industry. It's part of that supply chain, and all of those components, from growing the seed to putting it on the table, are all part of that supply chain that we need to be aware of and to know about. Noting a presentation by Dr. Lisa Denny, who's the workforce demographer, and she presented some papers at the Tasmanian Economic Forum this month, and also at the TAPG AGM. And that need to build a culture of lifelong learning is really important. We need, in the future, an agile workforce. We need targeted training and workforce Tasmanians have difficulty with literacy and numeracy. We have to get the basics right. So that's one of the skill sets that's really important. We also need to look at what sort of things are the soft skills. So some of those soft skills in the future will be really important as we move to less people in the workforce, more IT. We're going to need to be able to make sure that we're efficient and that we're productive. So there's essential business skills that are going to be really important, including research, the development and innovation that we see in places like TIA. We need to know about financial and risk management, about marketing and sales. A really important one is communication. How do we communicate across generations, across different types of industry? How does the banker talk to the farmer? How does the extension officer talk to their cohort, and provide information so it is really easy to understand, that it's practical and that it's applicable. It's no use having a plethora of information if we can't use it. And use it to the advantage of the industry in Tasmania. We need to make sure that we have a supportive workspace. So finding and leading staff, making sure that they are supported is really important. We also need to have skills in planning, in growth and in development. and in decision making. So they're really important skills, but they're often forgotten as part of how we're running a business. Increasingly in the future, we're going to have to look at digital technology, at cyber risks, and we're also going to have to look at adaptability. The amount of change that we're actually seeing in the future is really going to continue to expand, and that's something that's really important, that we can adapt and be flexible. So we need quality practical learning. We need to be focused on outcomes. They need to be fit for purpose with future ideas. And we need to have the soft skills. And I think that's probably one thing that's really important. Everyone will have multiple careers in their lifetime, and there's so many opportunities in the future for Tassie. Thanks, Bianca.
Thanks, Elizabeth. That is fantastic. Now we've got our final speaker, who's Charles Downey, our 2021 Tasmanian Nuffield Scholar, supported by the J.M. Roberts Charitable Trust and the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture. His scholarship research topic was how agricultural businesses teach employees increasingly complex skills to new people in their businesses. Welcome, Charles.
Thanks, Bianca. Yes, and also, again, thanks to Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture and the J.M. Roberts Trust for support with the scholarship. It was tremendous, and I hope we get a lot out of it. I'm the owner-manager of Glenelg Estate, a family business in southern Tasmania, and 2021 Nuffield Scholar. We run approximately 14 to 15,000 merino sheep, 350 Angus cattle, some agroforestry, and have a 35-hectare vineyard. I'm the only family member working there, so I'm quite reliant on staff, of which we have 2 full-time, 2 part-time, 1 regular casual, plus all of our seasonal workers. It's interesting the comments from the other speakers today about the importance technology is going to have. That led me into my Nuffield topic, because we need to keep investing in technology to improve efficiency, improve yield, continue to drive down the cost of production. The more complex we make our business, the harder it is to get staff with appropriate skills. So what gives? I was initially intending to look at technology implementation on farm through Nuffield after frustration in using electronic tags and associated equipment for collecting data in our sheep flock for genetic improvement. It was okay for me, but it felt like every time I turned my back, something would go wrong with the hardware, and the staff found it really difficult to sort out. And on my travels, I spoke to a UK scholar who worked in the space of precision livestock data and equipment, and who made the comment that if something isn't supported properly early on, it gets thrown over the hedge, which was my experience in our business. But by the time I got my application completed, it was more about how do we teach complex skills to people quickly so that they become productive as quickly as possible, rather than the technology itself. The technology is just a tool, and people can learn to use all sorts of tools. The problem with the lack of people wanting to work in agriculture was common to the countries I visited, where each relied on migrant communities from poorer countries to provide the bulk agricultural workforce. In England and Germany, the labour supply was generally Eastern Europe. In Ontario, Canada, there was a program with Jamaica to provide workers. In the US, they relied on Mexico. And of course, New Zealand and Australia, we rely on the Pacific Islands. Along with increased numbers of temporary workers coming into Australia to work, we've had an almost 60% reduction in the number of 15 to 24-year-olds working in ag in the past 20 years. Back to Nathan's comment that you can't assume anybody has any connection to agriculture and any basic skills when they first go to TAFE or come into a business workplace. And along with this, the demographic trends for younger people to have far more careers over their working lives than previous generations. So we're probably not going to get long-term staff. I often ask people I visited through Nuffield and especially if they've adopted more technology, have you found it more difficult to get staff? And the comments were usually, it's harder to get skilled staff. I was introduced to a couple of comments related to teaching through people through the Nuffield network. One was from a UK scholar who works for a farm software company, Field Margin. She recommended reading a book called The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman. The book introduced the conceptual or the mental model, which is a representation in someone's mind of how something works, to bridge that gap between what we want as employers in our farming businesses and people with no experience. We need to have a method of translating our mental models to something that's easily understandable by somebody else. The second idea was from a person I met in Kansas, the US. He, prior to his current role with the US Department of Agriculture, sorry, Kansas Department of Agriculture, he worked in education, and he commented that the education system relies on teaching a series of graduated skills, with each level creating a foundation for the next, and asked me, what's a level 1 skill in your business? But Russell then went on to say, well, for someone who's never been on a farm before, opening a gate may be a level 1 skill. I hadn't thought of it like that, but you can see what he's getting at. So existing TAFE program is designed to ensure that a nationally consistent curriculum to ensure people have consistent skills across the country. However, it still relies on the individual workplace to be able to teach those skills to practical completion. If I take a trainee on, they might be at TAFE 4 weeks a year, but they're with me for 44. So the good skilled employees still need workplaces where they can learn those skills, and we can't really outsource that to anyone. There's 4 basic methods of learning that are commonly cited: reading/writing, watching, listening, and doing. So if we're going to transfer information to someone new, we need to understand how they learn. We had a couple of comments, I think, from previous speakers about the level of education. In agriculture, over 55% of the workforce has no post-secondary education, compared to 1/3 of the general population. So we have to think about how we provide support and learning materials for that demographic. What I really found, casualised and transient workforces, normally in developed countries, we're more likely to employ people for a short period of time. The likelihood is they won't have any exposure to agriculture and may not stay for long. Still need people, no matter how good the technology becomes. We still need people. We still need people to learn those skills, and we have to be able to teach them. There's an advantage for businesses that can teach new skills quickly, new employees the key skills quickly. They can recruit for attitude and talent, not skill. The foundational skills are different for each business, but understanding them and knowing how to teach them and demonstrate them and support them is critical. And increasing scale was the other big standout among the other businesses I saw around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. And also thank you to each and every one of our panel members so far, and also to the audience for sending through some really great questions. If you think of them, please continue to send them through. We're going to leap now into the live Q&A part. So to start with, I've got a question for Alistair. So in terms of this, what specific initiatives are currently in place to shift the perception of agriculture within the community? Off to you, Al.
Thank you, Bianca, and thank you for the question. That is quite a big question, because I think shifting the perception doesn't just belong to one institute or one body, but it belongs holistically to everybody that's involved in the sector in some way. And so some of the initiatives that we have in train at the moment is being driven through what we're calling the Tasmanian Agriculture Education and Training Partnership. And the key word there is partnership. So it's, for example, it's about how the university partners with industry, partners with DSIP, so the department with what was Department of Education, independent schools, with TasTAFE, to holistically, in our various ways, come together to lift it. And there are some opportunities there. So the industry obviously has a key role in helping shape what it's like, what it's like to work within it, to attract new entrants. And then we have our role in saying, well, these are sort of educational opportunities to equip people to come in and to meet those needs. So yeah, I think it's a holistic approach. It's working in collaboration and in partnership, and we have some discussions at the moment seeking to address that very topic with hopefully some very high level promotional activity.
Fantastic. Thank you, Al. Very succinct. I've got a question now for Andrew Harris from Education. Is there a consolidated approach for the sector to deliver career education events in agriculture and agribusiness to secondary and senior secondary students in 2024 and beyond? Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Bianca. Thanks for the question. Look, the short answer is no, there isn't. There were some great programs running a couple of years ago that were facilitated largely by the Beacon Foundation and in partnership with other groups. And they were great events where lots of students would come together from various schools and get a taste of all sorts of different industry in one day. And I was part of a number of those. But the events of COVID saw the demise of that event. But a lot of schools and colleges do take on and do implement their own expos, career expos and things like that. And we're often invited to those. So the challenge there is, of course, the capacity of people to go to the many events. The other challenge we have is the breadth of our sector and our industry. When you go to an event, what's the message we're giving? So it comes back to what Alistair was just talking about around, is it more about the image and the opportunities, and how do we capture that succinctly? It's on the agenda. I have been part of groups that are looking at this and how we can support a concise and consolidated approach. We've got to get our head around how do we describe agriculture and opportunities and careers in agriculture in a succinct way. So that's our challenge first, and then we can head off to those forums and etc. to promote the wonderful opportunities to students.
Thanks, Andrew. Awesome. Now moving along, a question for Charles. How would you promote agriculture as a career to young people as an attractive career option for them? Thanks, Charles.
No worries. I think the big things for me, like the variety of jobs, I think when Alistair was talking earlier, he was described the number of different career paths within agriculture. And I think that in itself is a terrific incentive to look at it as a career. I do remember reading some comments somewhere through my research for Nuffield that said, I can't remember the stats on it, but the impact the first workplace in an industry has on a person's perception of that industry for the rest of their life is huge. And so as businesses, if we take people in for work experience or first employees, having a professional approach to teaching and training and doing a really good job in that first instance of selling the good parts of an industry makes a huge difference. And then as your business gets known and as a good place to work, then you have more people likely to tap on the door. I think those two things, what are those really good points about agriculture and selling them, but then also providing that great first experience to agriculture makes a huge difference.
Thank you, Charles. I've got a question now for Elizabeth. What key strategies or policies are being considered to achieve the Tasmanian Government's target of increasing the annual farmer gate value to $10 billion by 2050? So a bit of a broad one, but just to touch on that.
Yeah, it is a broad one. I think as an industry, there are a lot of players, and there's a lot of associations and organisations, a lot of small businesses, and we're working collaboratively to come together, and we have this aim to work with government at all levels to ensure that our Tasmanian ag industry is really going to meet the needs of what we've aimed for, which is pretty ambitious. There's a lot of different components to that, and that's not only just within the supply chain and at farm gate. It's also how do we actually get the labour into Tassie? How do we get the freight? What's our social license in the future? So there's climatic variability. We continue to work collaboratively as an industry, but there is a lot of work to do to get to that target.
Thank you. Do we have any other panel members who might want to add to that as well? We've also got some other questions. Leap in there. All good. I've got a question now for Nathan. So a question is, will learning in TasTAFE be a potential pathway into a degree in agricultural science or beyond? And if so, what sort of skills do you build on? And will there be credits, or how will that consolidate your learning from TasTAFE into that parallel pathway?
Thanks, Bianca. Articulation from TasTAFE to UTAS or elsewhere has been a troubling question for a lot of years. It's always been intended that it will happen, and there's been ways it has happened in the past. Currently, I believe there are conversations between UTAS and TasTAFE looking at a new model for that articulation. So I can't comment on that. It has happened in the past, and generally students have found benefit because they've picked up some practical and some strategic learning that they've been able to take on and use to build on as they develop research and and extension skills. But it has happened in the past. I believe it still does, but it's to formalise it and to make it a thing is currently under discussion.
Thank you, Nathan. We've got a question now. I'm going to direct it at Elizabeth because it's talking about skills and attributes. Could you elaborate on some skills and attributes, as you mentioned, lifelong learners, that future employers in the agriculture sector are actively seeking currently?
Thanks, Bianca. There's, depending on the type of role, so it is a very broad question, but I think some of the key things to look for particularly young students that are coming through is that adaptability. It is about being able to get on with the job and to be providing and supporting the workplace. So understanding the industry, knowing that you can actually communicate well with your employer, with the managers. Those sort of skills are going to be really important in the future. From a technical point of view, obviously depending on what part of the industry that you're going into, but those technical skills and to be open to learning is going to be a really important one as well. Increasingly, as people look to employ, and we've got a small cohort of people in the labour market, so it's going to increasingly be hard to get those people when you're competing against mining and construction and all the other industries. We need people that stand out and that help with innovation, that will get on and research some of the ways for agriculture to be productive, and that will be helpful.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Fantastic. I've got a question now for Andrew. What do you feel are the biggest barriers to effective agriculture education delivery for students?
Yeah, thanks, Bianca, and thanks to Lauren for the question. I think it's, well, I can tell you what it's not. The barrier is not access to high quality teaching and learning resources, because there are so many available in this country. There are so many that have been developed by our own education department over the last 8 or so years here in Tasmania. The Primary Industries Education Foundation of Australia, through their Prime Zone portal, have access to literally thousands of high quality resources that can support teaching and learning in schools. So it's not a lack of resources. It's probably more to do with a lack of confidence amongst teachers, knowing how to deliver it, how to access the resources, how they can go about designing an engaging program. So it's probably just that lack. I mean, we don't train. It's not an area that's included in pre-career training at university, and so it'd be nice to have an element of that in there somewhere. But it's just about the confidence of teachers and knowing where to access the resources and how to work with them. And we're getting there slowly. I mean, we've got, as I said, there are a lot of resources. A lot of schools in Tasmania do engage with them, but it's probably individual teachers just need that boost in confidence, really. I'd say that's the biggest barrier at the moment.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, actually, I might just touch on that a little bit further. What's happening towards making agriculture mandatory in schools? That's another question we've received through there. So you did touch on that slightly. But yeah, just to elaborate a little bit more on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, very quickly. Look, nationally, the only state in the country that has a mandatory element to food and fibre agricultural education in schools, so I'm talking early years to year 10, is New South Wales, where they have 2 units of mandatory food and fibre study in year 8. So we're only talking 1 year. So it's not like throughout every year, but I mean, that's a fantastic thing that they've embraced that in that state. There is now a working group that's being facilitated by PIFA, the Primary Industries Education Foundation of Australia, that's brought together a working group that represents industry and educators from all around the country. And that working group has been endorsed by the Federal Minister for Agriculture, I believe, and they are looking at what is currently happening in food and fibre ag education in schools and what might be possible moving forward. So that's an ongoing project. So that's a bit of work that's looking at that. In the Tasmanian context, we have, through the Revitalising School Farms initiative that's been around since 2018, we have 15 schools in this state that receive targeted resourcing, additional resourcing. And so you could make a case that it's mandatory in 15 schools in this state. So, I mean, that's one way to look at it. You know, certainly there's an expectation in those schools. I wouldn't say it's mandatory, but there's an expectation that they deliver food and fibre ag education. I hope that helps.
You're doing great work, and they're all throughout the state as well. So it's a great initiative. Thanks, Andrew. We've got a question here from a audience member who I'll direct this firstly at Charles. Now, also having any other panel members want to chip in as well on this one. The question says, certain skills are being lost for newer generations. Map reading is crucial, particularly for graduates and newer professionals, but many haven't held a map as a paper version or are lost without a GPS signal. Communicating with a range of people, farmers to business leaders, is challenging them too. So both practical and communication soft skills. Can these be addressed through teaching materials? So Charles, what are your thoughts on this one?
I think yes, the short answer is yes, I think they could be. Certainly what I've seen with some of the younger trainees coming through now, there's a lot of skills that are lacking, and communication, the confidence to ask for help when something's wrong is a big one. And the other one is basic maths and basic English. Like really easy example, we've just had an issue with some automated or increased level of technology with spray rate controllers in our vineyard. And we've had to go back to using nozzle charts and having to drive at a constant speed and doing some maths to make sure we're putting on the right rate on, which some people really struggle with. I know from experience, some of my employees that haven't had a pretty sound secondary education really struggle with the farm chemical users course because of the maths involved in it. And I think that's an issue coming out of secondary schools or maybe even primary schools across the board. So as a business, you do have to be able to support people to pick up more skills that you would have probably a generation ago, you would have assumed that they would have learned that in school.
Thanks, Charles. Elizabeth, any?
Yeah, there is certainly a loss of skills, although map reading, I think, for some of the older generation, and I'm okay at it, but I know of others that have navigation skills are pretty horrific, even the older generation. I think that, there has been a lot of work done in mapping some skills, but some of those basics are definitely missing. And I think there's also a stigma, particularly with Charles was talking about the literacy and numeracy. I don't know how many people are aware of 2610, which is a state government initiative are not deemed to be literate or numerate in Tasmania is very high. We did a pilot project on the northwest coast, and it was interesting that there was a low take up because people really struggle with the pride of being able to look at literacy and numeracy. And as Charles talked about, I've had examples of people that, a farmer who wanted an irrigation line put a third across the paddock or a fence across the paddock, and can't do those basic skills. So how do we do that? And there's a real stigma similar to the mental health and everything that we've had. We're just embarking on a project with 2610 at the moment, just to start to talk about literacy and numeracy and how can we get those basic skills back. And I think we really need to spend a lot of time as an industry and extension officers and those to identify and support people to get the help that they need to be able to do that, particularly with digital literacy being at the forefront of the future.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I will now, a question for Alistair. Most people live in cities in Australia. We do like the urban environment. What suggestions can you make to attract city-based young people into agriculture as a pathway?
Thanks, Bianca. That's a bit of a challenging question, isn't it? But it's a good question, because I think it highlights, one, we've seen a global trend on population migration towards cities. But also I think we're seeing a trend within communities in cities, though, of a greater interest in where their food comes from. And so I think when you look at our demographics in our Bachelor of Agricultural Science program, you'll start to see the large proportion of those students are actually coming from the cities, from Hobart or Launceston, as opposed to necessarily from a farm, which we would have historically seen. So I think there's a trend there within the cities of a deep interest in the origin of their food, the safe production of food, and also the socially and environmentally responsible production of food. And I think we can appeal to that deep interest of what sits inside young people, these altruistic values, to encourage them to think about a career and to paint a career in agriculture that's not just about farming. It is about farming, yes, and it's vitally important, but often we have this association with the word agriculture with gumboots, and somehow we have to paint a picture what a career in agriculture actually looks like, which is far more diverse than just that. Even though that can be great fun as well, because we already mentioned ag tech and other things. So I think there's a great opportunity to appeal to those intrinsic values of there. Now, Bianca, while I do have the microphone, may I touch on something else that was discussed earlier as well, because I think it's important to that question. But it comes back to partnerships around teaching, and we talked about TasTAFE and the potential for a pathway into the Bachelor of Agricultural Science, and that's something that we are looking at. But importantly, we're looking at how we actually team up to deliver courses. So if you're looking here at Tasmania, I think we have the ideal setting. We have a diverse and dynamic industry that's not necessarily well understood by our own local communities, just how diverse and dynamic and large it actually is. And then we have a single university. And so there's an opportunity to partner with the different providers of education and training to do good stuff. Now, there's a range and diversity of job needs out there, and it ranges from people doing blue sky research through to very applied. And so we're looking at teaming with TasTAFE, not just for a pathway, but for potentially what it would look like to have a joint offering. And they'll be able to promote it locally, but also nationally, to say, why not come to Tasmania to acquire these practical skills that are underpinned by some good theory as well. Because in our institute, we have a diverse range of discipline science expertise within the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture that can help inform some of that as we work alongside TasTAFE as well as industry. So I think that's partly the answer for addressing what happens in cities as well, to make known the full extent of the career opportunities.
Alistair, that's very exciting, especially working together with collective expertise and resources. That's fantastic. A quick question now. We've only got a couple more minutes in this forum. It's been rapid fire. I love it. So many questions. One quick question for Charlie. As an employer, are there specific skill sets that you would expect a prospective employee who has taken, for example, a Cert 2 or Cert 3 in agriculture to be competent or, well-versed in? I know it's very broad, but just thinking off the top of your head, what are some of those really core skills that you would expect?
If someone applied for a job who had a certificate 2 or 3, I would assume that they are interested in a career in agriculture if they're going to another job, and that at least they can knuckle down and finish a qualification off. There's so many different streams within the certificate 2 or 3. I'd have to go in then and talk to them and see what they've done, and then figure out what units they've done, what their previous employment was. And I do think their previous employment is where they would have learned most of the skills. Hopefully they'd have some theory down, good theory for the units they've done. And I'd probably have a few questions to test that knowledge. But the practical skills, a lot of that, the majority would have been taught in their previous place of employment while they were training.
Great, thank you.
And the question or not.
No, that does. And Nathan, do you have anything to add to that as well?
Yeah, that question changes from sector to sector and region to region. So the answer to that question, in some regions and some sectors, a key employability skill would be the ability to weld things together or to change oil filters on tractors. Whereas in some other sectors, it's about doing the maths around chemical spraying or about operating technology. And I think it's an employer by employer thing that they're all looking for different skills based on their different and more specialised operations.
Thank you. That's great context. It's very diverse and so many individual skills within that. I think now, I mean, we've had such great discussions here and gone through a range. I think we've answered around 12 different questions from the audience as well, which is fantastic. I'm sure that you'd all help me in joining to thank our panel for their insights today and their fantastic contributions. And so, yeah, please, in terms of keep updated in terms of upcoming TR events, make sure you're subscribed via relevant channels. And yeah, please, in the chat, you've got details of how to get onto that newsletter. And before you leave, please take a moment to complete a short survey on your screen. We really appreciate you joining us for today's event and wish you a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.